This new Albanese government has run smack into massive trouble in its very first 3 weeks. I know it's not all its own fault, but still. The cost of living crisis and an energy crisis, not enough gas and electricity with prices through the roof. You know the whole story. Not its fault. But as I said last night, Labor must wake up. That's because one of the reasons we have this energy crisis is because of global warming ideology, moving away from fossil fuels. Both parties are doing that. Labor wants to do it even worse. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, one, we've lost the stable coal-fired power stations that we relied on. Two, we haven't developed the domestic gas supplies we should, especially in Victoria. Lots of green tape, lots of bans. And three, the failure of green power to make up the difference. In fact, the failure full stop. It's so unreliable. We haven't been getting enough wind now for our wind farms for weeks. And we've had too much cloud and rain in the east for our solar farms. And that is why one of our biggest experts in renewable energy, Jeff Dimery, he actually heads Alinta Energy. They know this stuff. They do this stuff. Now says that shutting down our coal-fired power stations is economic suicide. And we need to open some of the ones that are shut already. And he says building more and more wind and solar farms like Labor wants, that's not going to get us out of these problems. Because he points out, you take last Wednesday at about this time, South Australia, that's got enough renewables to supply the entire state. They boast about this stuff, but it was producing just 1 single megawatt, those wind and solar farms, less than 1% of what it needed. No sun, no wind means no power. Thank God for coal and gas, but how much longer are we going to have that to bail us out? Joining me is Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell. Andrew, thanks for joining us. It seems to me pretty clear that Labor's got a huge wake-up call in its first 2-3 weeks. It's got to, I think, back off its radical plan to go even harder on renewable energy. But I didn't see any sign of that at all from Energy and Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen after his meeting last night with state energy ministers.
Well, let's see what practically happens, Andrew, is the main thing. We have to rely for a while on coal-fired power. There's no doubt about that. I think this crisis shows that. We have to do more on gas. Snowy Hydro 2 doesn't come through until 2026. So they can talk all they want about it, and people voted for it, but they're not going to be happy when gas and electricity prices go up, are they? So I think you'll see the gas trigger reformed. That's what they announced today. And gas companies forced to keep some of their supplies on shore. And in terms of electricity, well, they've got to build the infrastructure for renewables and the like, but that is going to take years. So they've got a plan for a plan at the moment, but it is amazing this is all happening basically 2 or 3 weeks after an election where I think 7 independents were elected on a climate change platform, and Labor and the Greens won some seats that way as well. It is a reality check, and I think it's a very interesting one. And the suggestion by Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen, the climate wars are over, including Albanese on election night, you've got to be kidding, don't you?
Absolutely kidding, absolutely. And also, we're talking about electing the Teals. Be careful what you wish for. The Liberals have been playing, meanwhile, with the idea of backing nuclear power instead. I think this is a little bit of a fraud, really. Look, guys, start defending coal. How about that? It's right there in the ground right now with power stations ready to go. Chris Bowen today went right off on this Liberal, let's maybe look at nuclear. Here he is.
We have a cost of living crisis, energy prices going through the roof, and what's their big bright idea? They say, let's have the most expensive form of energy we can possibly think of. Let's come up with the most expensive form of energy and let's put that in the system because that's going to make power prices cheaper. They want that debate? They really want to argue that? Bring it on. It's just a complete joke.
Now, Andrew, it's absolutely true. The Australian Energy Market Operator does say that nuclear is by far the most expensive energy generator to build. But when it's built, it at least does give you guaranteed 24/7 power and without any emissions. So if you're really about global warming, how about that? But why was Chris Bowen so angry?
I've got no idea. I guess it's his personality. I mean, this is the guy who said, if you don't like our franking credits policy, don't vote for us. And then guess what happened? People said, OK, So I don't know if he's always that politically smart, Chris Bowen, but he's got a hell of a challenge now. He's a former treasurer only for 2 months under Kevin Rudd, of course. He's talked about his leader. I think you see with that why Chris Bowen will never be leader, quite frankly. I thought it was a little bit over the top. But, you know, he's under a bit of stress at the moment, and he's pretty angry, I guess, that he's getting attacked by the government when he thinks they should have done more in the energy space. They talked about a gas-led recovery. The government view is, where is that gas-led recovery? You were all talk. But he's got some challenges ahead. He's an interesting character, Chris Bowen.
Sure is. Maybe we should look at all the premiers that stood in the way of opening gas fields for so long, particularly Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews. A fascinating intervention today, I have to say, on defence by Opposition Leader Peter Dutton, the former Defence Minister. He's written a piece in the Australian newspaper today revealing he was in talks with the US about buying 2 of its nuclear subs straight off the production line. No talk about let's build them all in South Australia, which I always thought was an idiocy. Straight off the production line for delivery in 2030, just 8 years from now. And this came, of course, after the new Defence Minister, Richard Marles, was saying last week, oh no, these nuclear subs, they're going to be late. We wouldn't get them for another 20 years at least, and then we'd need to build some new diesel ones in the meantime. It sounds to me that Peter Dutton was calling out Richard Marles for that misleading information, and Richard Marles wasn't happy at all about that today.
No, he wasn't. And they both ended up having a bit of a shot at each other. But the government's not ruling out buying those subs early. In an interview last year with Peter Dutton, he did say to me, I did ask, are you looking to lease subs in the meantime from the US? And he indicated, yes, I am working on that. But here it's really clear. He kept alluding to this before the campaign, during the campaign. We might have something to say soon about getting submarines up and running, nuclear submarines in Australia quicker. Big question out of this for me is, did Scott Morrison stop Peter Dutton talking about this during the campaign? And if so, why? Is it because it would raise concerns about the manufacturing element in South Australia and they thought they'd lose seats there? It seems very peculiar when they're running for election they wouldn't mention this. Instead, they run on a promise to get submarines in 2040 out in the never-never, instead of mentioning this option that was clearly on the table to get them by 2030 from the Americans. So it is an interesting intervention. He wants to call him out. I just wonder why we weren't told earlier, Andrew.
That is a really good question. I also think he didn't want Richard Marles to take the credit for saying, I solved it. I got these subs, 10 years earlier than the government was talking about. So I think that there was a little bit of a scene setting there. But the thing is, you are so right. How often, I think this is one of being the biggest flaws, particularly in our submarines area, to treat that project like a job creation project for South Australia instead of something crucial for the defence of Australia. It doesn't matter who builds the subs if we need them now. Just get them. I don't get it. This is just crazy. But
the whole geopolitical framework will change by 2040. So it always looked like, so what? They're in 2040. This could have been a critical argument during the election campaign for Morrison. Anyway, he didn't take it up. Maybe he didn't think it was possible. I don't know.
So true. Yeah, but in the meantime, they got all those hits. Greg Sheridan was on this too. We're not going to get these subs when we need them. We're going to get them in 20 years when we need them now. I mean, you're kidding. So I think you're right. That was a really big political miscalculation. Thank you very much for your time, Andrew Clennell.
Thanks, Andrew.